All right, and we're live. Hello, and welcome to Oily Trash Talk. This is the only podcast where one guy interviews another guy asking unfunny questions the entire time. I'm your host, Daddy Warbucks. With me, very special guest today, writer, director, producer, Milko Davis. Milko, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, War.
I'm super excited to talk to you. Your new movie, Killer Witches from Outer Space, comes out today and is available to stream on Amazon Prime, Plex, Fandango, Tubi, Fossum, Vimeo, and Roku. So we got 7 options. You've got no excuse not to go watch this movie immediately after seeing this. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about this movie, but before we get into that, long time Oily Trash Movies subscribers know you very well, but for those who are less familiar with Milko Davis, can you tell us a little bit about your career in filmmaking and Armageddon Films?
So, Armageddon was formed about 5 years ago. I had a company before that. You have a list of movies now. I think I hit my number 10 just with Killer Witches. There's an irony to that number, but it used to be Cyclops Dome, and we started making the smaller films. Well, they're all small films, but we started with a movie called Raiders of the Damned, and then we shifted, and more people got involved in the pipe dream that we all had of being filmmakers, and developed Armageddon. And there's a reason I called my company Armageddon. It's almost like a revengeful thing with the landscape of distribution. So I called myself Armageddon Films because I was coming back and wasn't going to get played with anymore, because a lot of filmmakers today, that's another story. But I built kind of a franchise. After a while, I said, wow, I keep looking back and saying, I've done that many films. So I've been lucky, and I've had great support from Kathy, who is my wife, but she's also my manager. And she started seeing the light with films because I started, getting better. Like when we do things, we get better at what we do each time. And she got into the business, and Armageddon started up like 5 years ago, and we've done like four movies under that label.
That's super exciting. So 10 movies altogether, quite the resume. Can you tell me how you got into filmmaking?
So I don't want to go like in a song and dance. I was born in Zurich, Switzerland, and didn't know a word of English when I moved to the U.S. I was 7 years old. All I can say was I had the art bug in me, and I was drawing pictures and making flip books. I don't know if you know what you know what flip books are. I was creating motion with pages of animation that you would flip. And the first film that I saw when I established myself in California with my parents, obviously, was a movie called Poseidon Adventure, which was it's an old film, but it's epic. And I was just I was just blown away. That's the first picture I saw on a big screen. And I was like blown away, almost disturbed because of large picture and sound. But as I started growing up, George and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were my mentors. I looked at them like, this is what I want to do. So I bought into it at a very young age, and didn't realize how hard the business would be, because you view yourself as them. That's, anybody that follows suit on anything in life. And that's what I did. I locked on to Lucas and Spielberg and saying, I'm going to do exactly what they do. And that just kind of, life took over, and I wasn't able to make movies exactly the way I thought I would. And years have gone through. I learned the basics, and it's still a tough business, but I find myself fortunate that I've been able to acquire the resources and the tools to learn better. I'm always learning, and when you watch movies, you have to understand it usually takes a huge team, but you start learning from the greats and saying, what made this tick? Because we can all pick up a camera, make movies. It's just, we have to learn the basics and get that instinct, become a filmmaker. And you have to kind of grow with the industry. Movies don't look the same as they did in the 80s. although I love the 80s, so I'm stuck in it.
How exciting. So you are essentially living out your childhood dream from 7 years old, seeing your first movie. And how does it feel knowing that someone of that age might be watching your movies and taking sort of the same inspiration?
It would be great, and I see it. I see it because I've worked around younger people, and I see myself in them. And I don't know if they see themselves in me, but if I can do anything great as time moves on, is be a good, figure for them. I don't have messaging in my films. I just want people to be entertained and happy. And I've shifted right from I always want to make horror films and gore films. And I just, when I grew out of it, I say, there's just too much crap that people should have fun. You can make scary movies and make them fun. And so hopefully I kind of created a generation behind me to see that. Like the 80s weren't all that bad. They had like the best pioneering days of filmmaking. And I miss those. And I think a lot of people do because there's something missing in today's tradition of film.
I think a
But
lot of
yeah,
people agree with that. That there seems to be a lack of soul in modern Hollywood, and with CGI and no more practical effects. You use a lot of practical effects in your movie, specifically Killer Witches from Outer Space. What can you tell us about this movie?
one, it wasn't supposed to happen. It's weird how that just kind of laid itself in. The budget was quite a bit bigger than what I'm used to. We had uh, performances of people that knew how to act better. We have a notable actor, but he's not well known, but he's been in hundreds and hundreds of films. His name is Branscombe Richmond, and he came from Hawaii, and he just happened to be on vacation. And within a week, say, okay, how can we fit this guy in? And that's the old guy that looks like Gandalf in the movie. The older guy. Well, he plays older guys. So he hopped in for a day, and we shot all his scenes with the kids. But the way the movie laid itself out, have you ever? There's a movie called Bowfinger where Steve Martin plays like a producer, and somebody looks at him in a scene and says, you only have $2,000 in a box. How are you going to make a film with $2,000? He said, every film has $2,000 in a box at the beginning. And there's some truth to that because we started with very little money and it just kind of added up. And within a month, we're saying, well, we're making a movie, I guess. Because I always start something with a kind of an idea and try to promote it as we're developing it. And I've done it before where it fails, but this one just took life on its own. And I found a good cinematographer who said, hey, I want to be on first feature. I'm tired of doing commercials. And it just developed itself. We got good actors in it. We only had 7 days to shoot principal photography. And then the rest was just probably a few months of VFX. And even though we had a bigger budget, that's just never good enough to do like the expensive CG, so that we revert back to like practical effects. So yeah, it developed itself. I'm very happy with the film. I think everybody who was involved is just as happy.
That's fantastic. So, what is your view on CGI versus practical effects? What do you like to use more? What would you like to see more of?
I think it's a necessary evil. I think CG has gone. If you look at, and I know there were articles written about this in YouTube channels that have displayed this thought. If you look at Jurassic Park from '92, and then you measure that with the new Jurassic Worlds that are out, I still go back to that '92 version saying, what is missing from these new ones? It's because these guys from '92, ILM, Spielberg, they were all innovators with film. We're using practical effects and CGI together. And I think that's the best world. The usage of both those elements make a film great.
So matrix the two, find the perfect balance. That's probably, would you say that's one of the primary challenges in modern filmmaking?
Yeah, and I think, if you look at a movie like The Matrix, it was very, very analog. I think you remember that weird scene that they had with Keanu Reeves floating in midair, and the camera rotated around him. If you look behind scene photos of that, it was a very practical element. It wasn't a CG element. In fact, when they did Matrix, it was still in the age of innovation. I mean, you could date back CGI to The Last Starfighter. made in the 80s, and that might have been the cookie that cracked, or the egg that cracked open for CG work, because it's been around. I think it's just been perfecting itself, and now it's perfected itself to nauseum.
Yeah, I think The Matrix is probably a great example, because even going through all of the bullet effects and the squibs and the rocks exploding, a lot of that is practical effects, where in modern CGI, in like a typical Marvel movie, everything's just particle effects and renders, and it doesn't have the same charm. Or I just something I just think the brain doesn't quite click with it. So I've noticed in some of the practical effects, if you can explain how these shots were made, it looked like you had the rubber costumes of the aliens, and then their faces were sort of blending or twisting, and you sort of CGI'd facial features, it looked like.
So I look at our creature in this movie as like the shark in Jaws. It never worked. Um, the whole Jaws thing was, it was a rubber shark that didn't work, right? We had an alien that I created, and I spent months working on a design which I was never happy with, and saying, wow, this is a stag prop. It's just doesn't have life. So we'd show it very few times or in the shadows. And then we would, use creative choices of stretching and moving the facial features in post, because we just didn't have the budget big enough to do, RC, not RC, but servoed, practical effects. That's how limited it was. So we kind of kept it in the dark, in the shadows, or just enough, get in, get out, give them like 3 seconds and then move away. And it was a clunky costume where they couldn't even see out of the neck, because we had built like a neck portal where they could see out of. And well, unfortunately, when we attached the jaw to the creature, it blocked the view. So these guys are walking around without being able to see out of maybe a breathing hole, looking down to make sure they weren't going to fall on their faces,
Well, it's funny you say that, because I think a lot of the horror movies and monster movies, particularly from the 80s, and I think Alien's a good example. What I get from it is that less is more, and the less you see the monster, one, that's always done to hide the effects, especially back in the 80s when, or especially in for lower budget things as well. And then you show the monster in a dark, more shadows on it, and then your mind sort of fills in the horror elements.
Exactly. I think that's what, I mean, looking at the history of Spielberg, the way he made his films, especially with Jaws, is he adopted the Alfred Hitchcock style, especially with Jaws, and it made it terrifying, right? And we can't copy anybody and say we're going back to it. You can just try to reinvent it and have fun with it. That's what we did with, Killer Witches. Is just a limited. I think we were limited in time. I think that's a weird thing, is we had a script that we couldn't even follow because we didn't have a big enough budget for the ambition for that script. And we're working on that now to see if Killer Witches does well, we would pursue that just a slightly higher budget so we can see it through, to say this is the way we wanted these witches to perform. And it became such a blueprint for a nostalgic maybe trilogy. If it works, we'll push on. I think we found some gold with Killer Witches. We just have to see how it performs with the audiences.
Well, how exciting. And you mentioned the word ambition, and I do think that is a great word to describe Milko Davis films, because you do always have these grand ideas and these elements from all these different genres that you typically wouldn't see mashed together in a single feature. I want to know, if budget wasn't an issue whatsoever, you get a blank check from some studio, what is the craziest idea you've ever had for a movie?
Wow. I'm crazy in general, so that's hard to narrow down. But I think, there's, for some reason, I have morphed into this family vision, and not Hallmark. I don't like Hallmark. They bore me. And, real terrific, like Alien Romulus is fantastic, and it's scary. I'm trying to fill in the blank in today's standards to say, I'm bringing with me the 80s. So my ideas, like you watch the other ones, like Jurassic Thunder, which was more of a derivative of everything. It was like the kitchen sink and everything. I think I was cracking my knuckles trying to find myself, what I'm, because I was moving into a area to say, who am I? What do I want to tell? And maybe less derivative and more original. And I'm still derivative because Killer Witches bounces off of Killer Clowns. But I think to answer your question now, finally, is I have a movie that I would love to do called Prone, and it's more of a serious film. And it would be a crazy budget, right? It would require a standard of budget that I'm not used to, and I hope to reach that someday. It's called Prone: The Seven Faces of Death, which is more of like I would say it's more of like a ambitious faith-based horror film.
I hope. Well, you know what? I hope that one day you get that budget and you get to make that film.
It's you can't see what's in my mind with it, and it would, if I got to get my vision on film, celluloid or digital, whatever it would be mind blowing, because it's like I have a faith-based element to everything I do now. It's just the way I was brought up, and I try to have fun with everything. And I certainly don't want to do faith-based where it's just like limits your audience. I like to open doors to entertain and put some thought. I think the last thing you want to do in film is tell people what they should feel. They should have fun and be entertained. That's it. Anybody that does anything beyond that, I think, is just cruising self-destruction. We got to see entertainment at face value, enjoy it, easy in, easy out. Like Back to the Future, it's humbled. Star Wars was humbled. These are the movies that I grew up with, and there was a key reason they are now considered gold, like cinematic gold. They stand the test of time. So I'm hoping that I can remember that, remind myself when I'm venturing forward. I think that answered your question. I'm not sure.
No, perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And I think you're almost you're sort of lucky, because I feel like currently there is almost a resurgence of 80s nostalgia movies where you've got Kung Fury and Psycho Gorman and sort of these movies that really do call back. And you mentioned Alien Romulus. I felt like I was watching the original Alien when I saw that. There really is a hunger in audiences for classic filmmaking.
Correct. I think they did that on purpose. I think they had a limited budget, much bigger than I would imagine, but you're seeing also quirky films. They got one called War. This is one that you and Bubble may want to see. It's called Freaky Frankie. That is like Ghoulies from the 80s. It's like hand puppets.
Okay.
And they had I don't know the actor, but he's like a close to an A-lister that bought into that and was a star of that. And I'm like, what is going on? Here's something really weird. I got picked up by a good friend. His name is Scott, and the company, they went to Cannes with Killer Witches, and they presented that movie. They had 2 golden movies, and I was like blown away. He said, "You're one of my golden movies." And there was another one made for $2 million, which is still small budget, but I'd be happy with $2 million, right? And it was a movie that had Beau Bridges in it, called Oscar's Eye. I'm not trying to promote or cross promote anything. All I can say is he had 2 theaters running, one with Killer Witches, one with this sympathy movie called Oscar's Eye, which almost looked like a Spielberg production to me on a low budget. So he played those, and we got most of the people sticking around in our theater to watch Killer Witches. And he called me, he said, "I'm blown away." He's trying to figure out what's going on with the landscape of streaming and production. I guess these weird movies are making it to the forefront now and getting noticed. I think there's just a drive. People want to be entertained right now. There are just too many heavy things going on in this world that they just want to shut it off and enjoy,
Yeah, that's true. And especially with Hollywood, it feels like everyone wants to stand on a pulpit with a microphone and give you their messaging. Just the idea of good old fashioned fun. Like, where did it go? Why can't we get it back? And that seems like a great strategy for bringing audiences back to the theaters. They're saying that the movie theaters are dying and the age of film is dying, and that's a horrible thought. I hate to see a future where there's no more movie theaters, and hopefully we can all band together and make cool
I,
movies that people have fun again.
I think that that can happen. It might come in a different shape or form. Eventually, I think theaters are going to have to rethink their old school strategy of movie releases in theaters. Like back in the day when I was growing up, you had to wait for new movies. They weren't just flooding theaters, right? You'd wait, and movies stuck around in theaters for months. I remember Star Wars was in theaters for almost a year and a half. And there were a lot of movies that did that. Aliens, the original with Ridley Scott, that was around for 7, 8 months in theaters. Now they're in 3 weeks, then out the next.
And then immediately on streaming 3 weeks later,
Yeah,
it's
or some coinciding, they'll go like to theaters and streaming. It's like, how is that business model working for you? Branscombe, who's kind of become like a friend to me, he's an acquaintance, had said that we're looking at the new Blockbuster. I'm like, how's that? Streaming is the new Blockbuster. It's like the old days when you went into Blockbuster and looked at all these video cases and all these shelves. And then all of a sudden, you're seeing the same thing on streaming. You're seeing all these pictures of movies kind of on digital shelves. It's the new Blockbuster. It really is.
yeah, I think that's a good analogy. And unfortunately, I think a lot of it is just driven by Hollywood greed. I think they want to just cut out the theater, and if Disney owns their own distribution streaming service, they get to collect all of that money as opposed to putting it in theaters, and the theaters get a chunk. And when it comes to greed of distributors and these big production companies, you had sort of teased a little bit earlier that you were having I don't know how much you want to get into this, but if you were having legal issues, or you were just sort of you seem to express that you felt preyed upon, or that indie developers are often preyed upon by some of these production and distribution companies. Did you want to get into that any?
Yeah, and I don't want to talk it because we'll have like 1,000 episodes of me griping about it. So I'll try to do it in a nutshell. And I'm not going to trash independent filmmaking distribution, because there's a handful that are people that are like-minded, that care about film, that are in the business to make money, but they're in the business and a venture to make money with possible artists that are the new Spielberg or Lucas. I think that what has happened with the film industry is it became trading movies like they were baseball cards. And you get these fly-by-night companies that call themselves distribution and end up just being normal Joes like you and me, and saying, hey, we can sell movies, we'll get it on in theaters and TV. It's following a big lie. It basically utilize film as just a component to make quick cash. And they feed off of filmmakers, making them believe that they're the new, Francis Ford Coppola or Nolan. I know a lot of director names that I love, but so like the problem exists in the new system, that it is not a film distribution company. It is quick cash turnaround. What's the old saying? There's a sucker born every minute. And a lot of those artists, not calling them suckers, but they get suckered into this fantasy that they're going to be taken care of by these aggregates. And this is what's happening, is there are a lot of people that could be great artists, directors, producers, and they get shut down because, listen, people do this. They put their homes on a second mortgage to follow their passion, and they find out their 200,000 or 300,000 that they risked turns to zero. Either by it's their first movie, they didn't know how to do it very well, that it could be sellable, or they just got smoked by somebody. And it's sad. So I think the only thing I can say about distribution is anybody that makes a movie, if you don't have enough money for a good attorney, don't do it. Don't make the movie, or unless you're rich and you're doing it for a hobby. And if you want to make money, you have to look at yourself more as in the business model. That doesn't mean becoming corrupt. It just says being in the movie business versus being a filmmaker. Because a filmmaker is a passion project waiting to happen, and you are enthusiastic, but it's like trying to open a restaurant. You know how to cook the food, you just don't know how to sell it. And you'll shut your doors within a week, because you have to understand the business model and the new way, because it's changing all the time. To the new producers out there, learn the business before you get into hammering out a film and expecting to make $1 million, because it's hard. I thought it was easy 5 years ago. I started realizing maybe I should have been an attorney or a doctor or a cop. I'm like, this is hard. You follow your dream, but it's painful. It's a painful trip.
Yeah, the story you tell, I feel like, is echoed across basically any creative medium where, the record labels took advantage of all the musicians and filmmakers and anything, really. It's knowing the business seems to be a pretty good piece of advice, or at least having a business manager or someone on your side, and maybe a retained attorney. Would you suggest something like that?
I would find a good entertainment attorney. Did you say retained or entertainment?
Retained.
Well, so like I'd say the basic title is a good attorney that knows the business. And unfortunately, they're expensive. But wouldn't you rather save up that money for somebody that is... It's funny, because I signed a contract finally with Killer Rich. I wanted everything to run good. And we hired an attorney, the right attorney, and he got titled as a Nazi. Like, gosh, this guy is like commanding the boat. I mean, come on, man, you're twisting my arm and burning it. But it's like, that's the business, right? Because any contract you sign is usually favorable to the person delivering that contract. You have to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, you're going to get a sucker punch contract, and you're going to be dealt the cards of disappointment.
Yeah, I would recommend anyone who ever gets a contract, even if you can't afford an attorney, take it to AI. There's some great programs out there, ChatGPT, Claude. I've sent some contracts, and I'm like, hey, can you explain these part A, part B, and let me know if there's anything that seems out of the ordinary, and what I should rewrite and take back. And here's what I've redlined from the contract. It's a start. Obviously AI isn't going to be as good as a paid attorney, but for those who are making movies on shoestring budgets, it's a great resource in my experience.
I'd say anything that can help provide a secure, not your local attorney that does real estate law. That doesn't work, because they don't know the business. Entertainment is a very weird business. And so those documents that you sign, even though they say they're not screwing you, there's about items to page that will say, we won't screw you on this page, but we're going to screw you on page 2. So you have to be able to have somebody with analytics experience that can figure out, and here's the other thing. You can make a movie and not make money, because that's the risk, right? You take a risk in the business. The problem is that there are many great movies that didn't see the daylight because of just bull crap. It falls into that model of corruption and scamming, and it's become great because it's easy. I'll give you a fantastic way of scammers that were able to make a bunch of money at the film festival circuit. Is Bob and Frank get together and they do an online film festival and take in 100 people that all paid $100 each. And there goes, like, where'd it go? It's not Sundance. It's not going to get you a career or a signed deal.
Yeah, it's definitely something. Make sure you do your homework on any film festival that you're submitting to. for certain. And with the contracts, it's almost ironic because a lot of people who are creative types, they want to get into filmmaking, they want to pursue their dreams, as you put it, and that's something that's very antithetical to the corporate world where you're working for somebody, you're working for a corporation, but then you sign these contracts and it's almost like you're back in that same position where all of your work and effort goes to some corporation or somebody who's not you.
Yes, I think that the greatest thing is you can learn a lot from the internet and just learn. Just like you brought up the whole AI thing with the turn, that's a good starting point, right? Because you learn from that, but also listen to some. The advantage of going on YouTube and typing in distribution companies that you should be aware of, that are scamming. Those people, those fresh minds, and the younger ones can come out and say, okay, how do I avoid these obstacles and not get, because I think Hollywood has been a scam industry from the very start. I just think there's more content now, so there's more, shady stuff going on as time can, because everybody can make a movie now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least I believe I
YouTube
can.
age.
Yeah. So yeah, but I totally agree with you.
So yeah, be aware, do your research. Definitely great things to keep in mind. So aside from the legal aspect of things, what advice would you give to aspiring directors and filmmakers?
So learn the craft. I think learn the craft in movie making and learn screenwriting. Just learn everything about it to understand what clicks. You can worry about the business part later. That I had a school instructor tell me, do small films first. Don't get into the big stuff. And I never listened. And I was always making big, like my version of what I thought was big movies. Do the small stuff. Collaborate, find people in like mind of what they want, they want to do the same thing, and just perfect your art. Then start learning about the business aspect when you get busy and trying to say, hey, this is the career I want this to go, because the market is flooded. Right now, it's really weird. It's not flooded this time around because they're in need of content. But learning all that, to learn the craft, become a connoisseur, and then learn the business, stage two. That goes in with learning marketing and trying, the whole game. To get the clicks and the views, it's just like a movie. You got to get the audience in the seats or at home clicking onto your movie. And that's a whole nother area to learn.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice because you can always learn how to do business, but to make art, that's something that just takes experience, time and experience.
Yeah, I've got gray hairs now, and it's like I look back going, wait a moment, what happened to time? It's like, wow, it actually took time to learn this. It wasn't like, how many people sit down in a theater or watch a movie and say, I can do that. And it's like, no, you can't. You got to learn it, right? You got to learn the levels and layers of what it takes. And the only other thing I say is don't go after a passion project. Go after, if you're trying to get in the business, focus on what's selling, what is your audience, understand the audience and that there's an opening. Because if you do one about, diving for oysters, that might not be the big popular one to do. So you got to focus on what is needed. Like look at the genre and scope out the genre. Is it flooded? You want to do, they always tell low budget filmmakers to do a horror film. But again, yes, do a horror film, but is the market flooded where you're going to try to compete against thousands of horror films? Try to find a niche that is sellable and has an audience.
I like that advice. Find a niche. That's sort of what we've been doing here at Oily Trash Movies. Our niche is that we review these low budget indie films that no one really has heard of usually or don't really get a lot of attention. And a big reason why we do that is because Bubble and I were also aspiring filmmakers, and we know that we're not going to be starting out in a multi-million-dollar budget, and we're going to be starting out with low budget filmmaking and learning from those who came before us who have produced low budget, studying that. I feel we're able to learn way more just in the way that these low budget films are put together, and you can sort of see how directors use creativity to make shots that otherwise would be very expensive. And learning that from you and from all the other movies we review here has been fantastic. I want to thank you so much because, to be honest, if it weren't for Jurassic Thunder, I don't think we'd have a podcast here. And not only would we not have a podcast, we would not have our debut short film, which is premiering October 18th at the Gem City Horror Festival. And
Nice.
I want to thank you because you inspired Bubble and I, and without you, we wouldn't be, there'd be one less filmmaking group on this earth.
I'm glad you guys are doing it. Just word of advice is learn from the others, so you might learn the dark sides of it to avoid it, so that you guys will continue, doing it just like I have.
We will be sure to beware the dark corners of the industry. I really appreciate your insight into the legal side and to the creative side as well. I'd like to turn it over for you if you'd like to promote any and all projects you're working on, have worked on, where people can find you, where they can find your movies, etc.
Yeah, well, thank you, War. I have all my movies under one label now, and if I were to target one basic platform, you can see all of them would be on Tubi. Of course, I'm promoting Killer Witches because that's the one coming out, but I think you had mentioned all the platforms, but I think it's like Amazon Prime, off the top of my head, Amazon Prime.
Yeah, Plex, Fandango,
yeah.
Tubi, Fossum, Vimeo, and Roku.
Yeah, and that is for the Canadian U.S. release. I don't know about foreign. That's going to happen down the road here very shortly. But we also have a movie that we did that had some problems. It was Ghosters, and we're trying to get the word out because it's been sitting under a dark cloud. But it's a fun movie. It was Ghosters, Phantom Patrol, and we're trying to get the word out on that, even though it may not be the best movie that I challenge myself to make, but I think it's still golden. And as far as Killer Witches, again, that was a lot of passion from a lot of people and performers. We lucked out with cinematography, lighting, and things like that. So Killer Witches definitely is kind of a flashback to the 80s, and a lot of good people worked on that with me.
Fantastic. Yeah, Milko has produced 10 movies. Definitely check them all out. Killer Witches from Outer Space premieres today. Please give them go give a view on Tubi or any of those other platforms, whichever ones you have. And Milko, I'm going to thank you again.
Thank you so much, Warren. Say hi to Bubble for me.
We'll do it. As we say here, take care, comb your hair.